Welcome to the Feminist Park podcast. I'm Kwame.
And I'm Leilani. It's great to be kicking off this journey with you all today.
Yeah, we're diving into work that's really closely tied to the vision behind the Feminist Park project.
Imagining these truly equitable public spaces, starting with the idea for an intersectional feminist park right here in Berlin.
Exactly. And this podcast, well, it's kind of an extension of that. We're going to be digging into the academic research that, supports and informs that kind of vision.
We'll be taking these dense, sometimes quite academic papers and really pulling out the core and insights.
And looking at them through specific lenses, things like environmental justice, intersectionality, anti-colonial thought, queer theory.
All the stuff that helps us think critically about space.
It is 7:15 a.m. on a just freezing November morning, and we are standing on the pavement right outside the courthouse in Avignon, France.
Oh, early and cold. That is a rough combination.
Yeah, exactly. I want you to picture the kind of morning where the cold doesn't just, chill your skin. It's the kind that seems to seep right up through the soles of your shoes.
Right, that deep, bone-chilling cold.
Exactly. So the sky is barely even starting to lighten at this point. The heavy wooden doors of the courthouse are firmly shut, but if you look around this plaza, there is a line already forming.
Which is wild for that time of morning.
Right, but here's the thing. It is not a line of, high-powered lawyers in their robes, and it's not the International Press Corps setting up their camera tripods either. It is a line entirely composed of women.
Entirely women. That is such a specific and striking detail.
It really is. And if you walk down the line, you see young women in their 20s, mostly. They're huddled together, clutching these paper cups of coffee they've just bought from a nearby bakery.
Just trying to stay warm, passing them back and forth.
Yeah, exactly. But then, just ahead of them, forming the actual vanguard of this queue, is a group of older women. Retirees, women named Brigitte Bernadette.
Wow.
And they are wrapped up in these thick scarves, and they have been standing in this exact spot on this freezing pavement every single morning since early September.
That is just incredible dedication. I mean, every single morning.
Yeah, and if you turn your back to them and look across the street, draped really high over the ancient, imposing stone ramparts of the city, there's a massive banner. You really can't miss it.
Like the banner, what does it say?
It reads, in these stark black letters, un viol est un viol. A rape is a rape.
It is such just a profound and arresting image to start with. What really strikes me is the incredible dissonance of that whole scene.
Dissonance. Well,
on one hand, it's so grounded in the deeply mundane reality of just a chilly morning, right? It's the logistics of getting coffee, the sheer boredom of waiting in a queue.
Shifting your weight from one freezing foot to the other.
Exactly, just normal life stuff. But that everyday normalcy is completely overshadowed by the monumental, historic, and frankly, terrifying weight of what is about to happen inside that building.
Yeah.
Once those wooden doors finally open.
Absolutely. And that specific tension, that razor-thin line between painfully ordinary everyday life and the absolutely horrific, that is exactly the terrain we are navigating today.
It's heavy, but it's so important.
It is. For this deep dive, we are pulling from some incredibly profound source material. We're looking at excerpts from the 2025 book Vivre avec les hommes, Réflexions sur le procès Pellico.
Which translates to Living with Men. Reflections on the Pellico trial.
Right, and it's written by the French philosopher Manon Garcia.
And I think it's really vital that we set the parameters for you, the listener, right at the top here. This is not, I repeat, not going to be a true crime recap.
No, absolutely not.
We are not here to meticulously detail the horrific, systematic acts committed by Dominique Pellico, who, drugged his wife, Giselle, over the course of a decade.
Right. The news media has covered all those gruesome logistics extensively already.
Exactly. Nor are we here to forensically profile the 50 co-accused men who participated in those assaults. Our mission today is quite different. It's a philosophical and sociological exploration.
So we're using Garcia's text to really examine what this specific trial reveals about, the invisible bedrock of our society.
Yeah, the physical and emotional architecture of our justice system, really.
And the everyday, just unspoken reality of simply living alongside men. We're going to unpack Garcia's central, haunting thesis.
Which she phrases as a very direct question. Can we live with men, and at what price?
It's quite a question. You might have read the headlines about this trial in your news feeds, but today we're looking at the spaces between those headlines.
The spaces we usually ignore.
Exactly. We are going to walk down the literal and figurative hallways of that courthouse. We're going to explore the daily mental calculus that women perform just to navigate a normal public park.
It's an exhausting calculus, too.
Oh, incredibly. And we are going to look straight at the genuinely terrifying concept of the ordinary man. So, okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with the physical space of the courthouse itself.
Yes, the building is actually a huge part of this story.
It really is, because Garcia points out something deeply startling about the geography of justice here. It really comes down to the mechanics of what the public is actually allowed to witness.
It's a fascinating place to start because the physical infrastructure of the Avignon courthouse was, frankly, just utterly unprepared for the reality of this case.
They just didn't see it coming.
Not at all. And to understand why, we really have to look at the legal norms in France. In cases of severe sexual violence, there is a deeply ingrained expectation, almost a default assumption by the judicial apparatus, that the trial will be held behind closed doors.
Right, they have a specific term for that, don't they?
They do. The French legal term is huis clos. And look, the reasoning behind a huis clos is entirely understandable.
Yeah, it's meant to be protective.
Exactly. It's designed to protect the victim's privacy, to shield them from the glare of public scrutiny while they have to sit there and recount unimaginable trauma.
Which makes total sense for the vast majority of cases. But Giselle Pellico made a decision that completely short-circuited that entire system.
It really did. She explicitly waived her right to a closed-door trial.
She demanded that the doors be thrown open.
Yes, and her stated reasoning was just so powerful. She said she wanted the shame to change sides. She wanted the public to see exactly who these men were.
But the physical building, literally could not accommodate that level of transparency, right? I mean, the courtroom just wasn't built for the world to watch.
Not even close. The main assize courtroom.
And just to clarify for the listener, the assize court in the French system is the specific court reserved for severe crimes or felonies tried before a jury, right?
Exactly, thank you. So that main courtroom was just far too small. I mean, think about the logistics. You have the panel of judges. You have 51 accused men.
Which is just a staggering number of defendants to fit in one room.
It's unheard of. And then you have their massive phalanx of defense lawyers, the civil parties representing the victim, and then hundreds of international journalists.
So there was literally no room left for the general public.
None. Zero. So the court administrators had to just improvise on the fly. They created an overflow room in a totally different part of the building.
Okay, so it's essentially a transmission room, right, where the public could sit and watch a live video feed of the proceedings on a screen.
Right. But even that overflow room had incredibly limited seating, which is exactly why those older women, Brigitte and Bernadette, were lining up in the freezing cold at 7:15 a.m.
They were standing out there for hours just to secure a plastic chair in a secondary room, just to watch a TV screen.
It's wild. But it gets even more complicated.
Yeah, and this is where I want to pause and really dig into what Garcia experienced in there. Because the physical setup of that transmission room creates a massive philosophical problem.
It really distorts the reality of the trial.
Exactly. Garcia notes that she was stuck in this overflow room for days before her official press accreditation cleared, and she was actually allowed into the main room. And while she's sitting there watching that screen, she realized how heavily edited and sanitized the public's view of justice really was.
And it all comes down to the camera angle.
Yes. Wait, let me make sure I'm picturing this correctly for the listener.
Yeah.
So if I am sitting in the overflow room, I'm looking at the screen.
Right.
I can see the judges sitting at a bench. I can see the prosecutors. I can see the witness stand where people are actually testifying. But Garcia points out something critical that is missing from the frame entirely.
The most important part, arguably.
Right. You never see the accused sitting in their glass box. You don't see their defense lawyers interacting with them. You don't see the police guarding them.
They're completely off screen.
And more importantly, you don't see their reactions. You don't see the smirks, the whispers, the shifting body language of the 51 men on trial.
Which changes everything.
Totally. Garcia writes that when she finally got her press pass and walked inside the actual main courtroom, she was physically shocked by the dynamic. She says that Dominic Pellico seemed to physically reign over the trial from his central position in the box.
Wow, reign. That's a strong word.
It is. But if you are the public, watching on the screen in the overflow room, that entire power dynamic, that entire physical presence is totally erased.
What's fascinating here is how it profoundly challenges one of the oldest maxims of legal philosophy, right?
Yeah.
The idea that justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done.
Right, you have to witness it.
Exactly. But what Garcia is asking us to consider is, if the lens is fixed and narrow, what kind of justice are we actually witnessing? The justice system, whether it's doing this intentionally to maintain order or simply through sheer bureaucratic incompetence and a lack of camera operators, is framing the narrative.
They're curating the experience.
Precisely. By literally dictating the borders of the screen, the court is sanitizing the experience of the trial. You are hearing the horrifying testimony, yes, but you are completely insulated from the physical reality of the men who actually perpetrated the violence.
I'm struggling with this a bit, though. Let me play devil's advocate.
Go for it.
If the goal of the justice system is to establish facts and, hand down a verdict, isn't seeing the judges and hearing the victim's testimony enough? I mean, why is seeing the perpetrators' faces, their microexpressions, so philosophically vital to justice being done?
That is the perfect question to ask, really, because it strikes right at the heart of what a public trial is supposed to achieve. A public trial isn't just a clinical fact-finding mission. It is a societal ritual of accountability.
Okay, a ritual. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, and when the accused are out of frame, they become abstract concepts. They are no longer living, breathing men sitting in a room. They just become the idea of a perpetrator.
So it softens the blow for the audience.
Exactly. And that abstraction makes it much, much easier for the public to compartmentalize the horror. Think about it. If a psychological expert is on the stand detailing the devastating trauma inflicted on the victim, the way the accused reacts to that testimony is vital context for society to witness.
Right. Like, do they even care?
Precisely. If the men in the box are scoffing, if they're rolling their eyes, if they look bored or just chatting with each other, that tells the public something profound and terrifying about their complete lack of remorse.
It would shatter any illusion that these men are, contrite or misunderstood.
Absolutely. By hiding them from the camera, the court essentially protects the accused from the full weight of public scrutiny. It renders their real-time humanity or their inhumanity rather totally invisible.
It's like watching a complex stage play, but half the stage is cast in pitch black shadow. You can hear the dialogue perfectly. You understand how the plot is moving forward. But you are missing all the silent reactions and the body language on the dark side of the stage that tells the real emotional story.
That is a perfect analogy.
But Garcia points out that this artificial compartmentalization, this sort of protected bubble, completely shatters the very second you step out of that courtroom and into the hallway.
Or the hallway, yes.
And this specific detail from her book just made my blood run cold. She talks about the Salle des Pas Perdus, which beautifully translates to the Hall of Lost Steps, but it's essentially just the main waiting hall of the courthouse.
Right, and to understand the terror of that waiting hall, we really have to look at the logistics of trying 51 men simultaneously.
Because they weren't all in jail.
Exactly. The French state simply did not have the capacity, or frankly the legal justification in all cases, to hold all of these men in pretrial detention.
Right. Only a fraction of them were actually incarcerated during the trial. The vast majority of the accused men were completely free to walk the streets.
They commuted to their own rape trial.
Which is it's mind-boggling. They arrived at the courthouse every morning through the front doors, just like the press, just like the public, just like Manon Garcia herself.
Which creates this surreal, almost nightmarish geography within the courthouse walls.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Garcia describes the visceral shock of this. She writes about walking into the courthouse, going to use the public restroom, or walking up to the vending machine to get a coffee, and suddenly realizing that the man standing right next to her, getting his own espresso, is one of the accused rapists.
They aren't behind thick glass out there.
No,
Yeah.
They use the same facilities, they stand in the same halls. And Garcia talks about the intense psychological toll of this forced proximity. She describes standing in the hall, just trying to gather her thoughts and listening to these accused men casually complaining to each other.
Complaining about what?
Complaining about the rabid feminists who have shown up outside the trial.
You have got to be kidding me.
No, she hears this. She describes the sheer exhausting anxiety of looking at every single middle-aged man in a suit who isn't wearing a lawyer's robe and wondering, is he one of them? Was he in that bedroom?
Let's put the listener in that exact scenario for a second, just to really feel the weight of that.
Yeah.
Imagine you are at your own office, standing by the water cooler or the coffee machine. You are complaining about the traffic or the weather.
Very normal stuff.
Right. And the guy next to you nods and agrees. It's a completely banal, normal human interaction. Now imagine finding out that the man you just nodded at spend his Tuesday night participating in the systematic, drugged assault of an unconscious woman, and then just went to work the next day.
It makes you sick to your stomach.
It really does. That is the profound cognitive dissonance Garcia is experiencing in this Salud de Pas Perdu. Because, when we as a society think of heinous, monstrous crimes, we desperately want the perpetrators to look like monsters.
We want them to have scars or crazy eyes or just look evil.
Exactly. We want them in orange jumpsuits, in shackles, heavily guarded, separated from our polite everyday society by armed police and thick reinforced glass. We need that physical barrier between us and them to feel safe.
To feel like the monsters are contained.
Yes. But Garcia's experience at the coffee machine dismantles that comfort entirely. These men are getting coffee. They are complaining about the protesters. They are painfully, terrifyingly normal.
And that physical proximity to their normalcy, the sheer unavoidable numbers of them just milling about the courthouse halls like businessmen at a boring conference. That leads directly into what I think is Garcia's most terrifying thesis in the entire book.
It's a dark pivot.
It is. It's the realization that the law has a hard limit, and in this courthouse, we might have just watched society hit a brick wall.
Yes, and this is perhaps Garcia's boldest and most unsettling philosophical claim. Because, a lot of legal analysts and commentators have framed the Manon trial as a historic victory for women.
Like it's a triumph of the system.
Exactly, a moment where the system finally functioned properly and dragged these men into the light. But Garcia argues the exact opposite. She says this trial paradoxically marks the end of an illusion.
The illusion that the courts will save us.
Precisely. It marks the end of placing our exclusive hope in the judicial system to actually solve the problem of men's violence against women.
Okay, to understand why she believes the system has failed, we really have to look at the math she presents, because the math is what just breaks the brain.
The numbers are staggering.
They really are. So, Dominique Pellicot lived with his wife in Manon. And for those who don't know, Manon is not a bustling metropolis. It's not Paris or Marseille. It is a small, quiet, provincial town.
Very quiet.
Right. So Pellicot utilized a website called Coco, which was this kind of rudimentary chat site that featured a geolocation function. And he specifically used this function because he wanted men who were nearby. He needed to ensure they could arrive quickly when his wife was heavily sedated.
You need local logistics.
Exactly. So over the course of a decade, he used this basic chat room to find at least 70 different men. And here's the statistic that just stops you in your tracks. All of them were located within a 50-kilometer radius of this house. That is roughly 30 miles.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the sociological implications are staggering. Think about it. If one single man, using a rudimentary local chat room, can easily find 70 willing participants within a 30-mile radius of a sleepy provincial town.
Just an hour's drive in any direction.
Right. How many men across the entirety of France, or the world for that matter, are capable of this if simply presented with the opportunity?
It's a horrifying thought.
It is. Because remember, the police only managed to identify and catch the 50 men whose faces were clear enough on the videos. The math suggests we're not dealing with an anomaly here. We are dealing with an epidemic.
It's not just one bad apple.
No, this isn't a single, isolated serial killer acting at a rare, twisted pathology. It is a shockingly large demographic. Garcia refers to this phenomenon as the terror of Monsieur Tout le Monde, Mr. Everyman.
Mr. Everyman. It's the absolute banality of their identities that gets me. They weren't shadowy figures from the criminal underworld. The men sitting in that courtroom were, like, firemen, municipal workers, local journalists, mechanics, IT specialists.
They were just the guys from the neighborhood.
Exactly. They ranged in age from guys in their 20s to retirees in their 70s. And when they finally get to court, this is where Garcia's frustration with the limits of the legal system really boils over into absolute despair.
Because of the evidence.
Yes. Because we have to remember, the evidence in this specific case is not circumstantial. It's not, a blurry photograph or a forgotten timeline from 20 years ago. Dominique Pellicot was a meticulous archivist of his own crimes.
He documented everything.
He had a bizarre pathological obsession with capturing every single assault on video. So the court has the most explicit, high-definition, undeniable, meticulously cataloged video evidence imaginable of these men committing these acts.
And yet, and this is where the psychological reality of Monsieur Tout le Monde becomes truly terrifying. Despite that incontrovertible proof being played on screens in a court of law, the men still deny their guilt.
Wait, how? How do you deny it when you were on 4K video?
Well, they don't deny that it's their physical body on the screen. They can't do that.
Yeah.
But they deny the intent.
Oh, the intent.
Right. They stand up in front of the judges and claim they thought it was just a spicy game, a consensual role play scenario arranged by a married couple. They claim they didn't know the depth of her sedation.
Even though she is entirely unresponsive on the video?
Exactly. They twist themselves into incredible knots of cognitive dissonance to find any possible loophole that excuses their presence in that bedroom.
It's just massive delusion.
And what makes it worse is that their defense lawyers aggressively support and weaponize this minimization. You mentioned the massive banner outside the courthouse earlier, right?
Yeah, the un viol is un viol one. A rape is a rape.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that banner wasn't just a general feminist slogan. It was actually a direct, targeted response to one of the defense lawyers, a man named Guillaume de Palma.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was a direct quote response.
It was. During the proceedings, de Palma literally stood up in the courtroom and argued, il y a viol et viol. There is rape and there is rape.
Which is just, I mean, that is a breathtakingly cynical and violent thing to say out loud in a courtroom. It's horrific.
He is heavily implying that because Giselle Pellico is completely unconscious, because there wasn't a violent physical struggle in a dark alley with a stranger holding a knife, it wasn't a real rape.
He's trying to create tiers of sexual violence.
Exactly. He is arguing that it was somehow less severe, a lesser category of crime entirely. And this leads me to a really dark conclusion, and I want to see if Garcia shares this.
Let's hear it.
If absolutely undeniable 4K video evidence is not enough to stop these men from making excuses, and if their highly educated lawyers are still perfectly comfortable using these archaic, deeply sexist cliches to minimize the acts in front of the international press, what hope does the justice system have in a normal case?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right, because in the vast majority of assault cases, there is no video. There is no meticulously kept hard drive. It is simply one woman's word against one man's word. That is the profoundly destabilizing realization at the core of Garcia's argument. Think about it. The entire architecture of the justice system is built on two foundational premises: deterrence and truth-finding.
Okay, right.
But Garcia looks at the Avignon courtroom and points out that the threat of prison clearly did not deter these 70 men. The law was on the books, it has been for decades, and they did it anyway.
They weren't scared of the consequences.
Not at all. Furthermore, the presentation of absolute objective truth, the video files, did not induce a sense of shame or accountability in the perpetrators. They watched themselves commit the crime and still said, I am not a rapist.
They just refused to accept reality.
Exactly. If the legal apparatus, operating at its maximum possible capacity with the best evidence a prosecutor could ever dream of, cannot fundamentally force these men to recognize the reality of their actions, then the law alone is wildly insufficient.
It's just a Band-Aid.
Yes. The problem is too vast, too deeply ingrained in the psychology of Monsieur Tout le Monde to be solved simply by building more courtrooms or handing down longer prison sentences.
And if the courts cannot fix it, if the threat of the highest criminal court doesn't stop the fireman or the IT specialist from driving over to that house, then the danger bleeds right out of the courtroom and spills directly into the everyday lives of women.
It's everywhere.
It really is. And here's where it gets really interesting, at least for me, because this brings us to what I found to be the most personally resonant and, frankly, exhausting part of Garcia's reflections.
The shift to her daily life.
Yes. She transitions away from the extreme, unimaginable horrors of that specific bedroom in Manon, and she turns the lens onto the very ordinary, everyday reality she lives herself.
It's a really powerful shift in the book.
It is. She writes extensively about the invisible architecture of fear and the constant background mental calculus that women are forced to perform just to exist in public spaces.
It's a brilliant and necessary pivot. She takes the extremity at the Pellico trial and uses it as a magnifying glass, basically, to examine the everyday microaggressions, the spatial negotiations, and the safety calculations that define the baseline of female existence.
She brings the horror home, essentially.
Yes, she is explicitly linking the men sitting in the glass box in Avignon to the societal norms that govern how she walks down her own street. It's deeply rooted in the concepts of feminist geography.
Feminist geography, that's the study of how our physical environments and public spaces are experienced vastly differently depending on your gender, right?
Exactly. It looks at who actually feels safe and welcome in a space.
Right. So she lists out these daily anxieties, and as a reader, I mean, they are so instantly recognizable. It's the calculus of simply getting dressed in the morning.
Oh, the clothing double bind.
Yes. She writes about staring at her closet and worrying if an outfit is too sexy or shows too much skin, because the ingrained societal voice immediately whispers, well, if something happens, they'll say she was asking for it.
We've all heard that narrative.
Constantly. But then she experiences the immediate whiplash counterthought. If she chooses clothes that are too baggy or dresses too neglected, that same societal voice says, well, no wonder her husband cheats on her. Look how she lets herself go.
It is a completely unwinnable situation.
Totally unwinnable. She even writes about the perverse, tragic relief of aging, because she feels that getting older means she passes more unnoticed by the male gaze.
And this anxiety, it extends far beyond just personal presentation and wardrobe choices.
Yeah.
It dictates how she physically navigates the world.
The geography part.
Right. Because urban spaces, our parks, our transit systems, our city squares, they are theoretically designed to be public, neutral, and open to all citizens, right?
In theory, sure.
But feminist geography reveals that these spaces are often designed around a default male body and a male experience of safety. Garcia described the intense hyper-awareness she feels specifically when she is navigating local parks.
Oh, this part was wild.
She knows a fascinating and deeply disturbing shift in the environment depending on who she is with.
Yes. This observation about the park was incredible. She says that when she is walking through the park alone, she is acutely aware of the men lingering on the benches, the men standing by the pathways.
She feels like a target.
Exactly. She is subjected to their gaze, their potential harassment, or their solicitations. But she notes that when she is walking those exact same paths to the daycare, holding the hands of her young daughters, the dynamic instantly changes.
It's like night and day.
Totally. The men do not approach her. It is as if her physical status as a mother provides a temporary invisible shield that her mere status as a woman does not.
It's so revealing about how men categorize women in public.
Right. Because she is accompanied by children, she is suddenly categorized as off-limits in the unwritten rules of male public behavior.
It perfectly highlights how public space is never actually neutral. For women, and indeed for many marginalized groups, navigating a supposedly relaxing space like a park requires a constant background risk assessment.
It's exhausting.
It is. You're constantly asking, who is walking behind me? Are there clear sight lines to the exit? Are the bushes too thick over there? Is that street lamp broken?
Right, you're constantly mapping the threats.
Exactly. Garcia's experience in the park illustrates how the mere presence of men fundamentally alters the physical and psychological landscape for women. The park ceases to be a place of leisure and just becomes a grid of potential threats that must be managed.
I was actually trying to think of an analogy for this feeling, because it's really hard to explain to someone who doesn't experience it daily.
It's like a background hum.
Yeah. I think it's like living your entire life in a city with a constant low-level earthquake warning.
Oh, I like that.
You know, you don't walk around screaming in a panic every single second of the day. You still go to work, you still buy your groceries, you still get your coffee in the salle de pas perdu. You function.
Because you have to.
Because you have to. But you never, ever walk under heavy construction scaffolding without looking up. You are always, on some level, scanning the environment for the thing that might crush you.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And the philosophical question Garcia poses is, how does a society function optimally when half of its population is carrying this massive, invisible, exhausting mental load every single time they step out their front door?
It's a massive drain on human potential. Furthermore, Garcia situates this personal exhaustion within a much broader and increasingly volatile cultural and political climate.
Right, the political backlash.
Exactly. And we need to be really clear here for our listeners. We are exploring Garcia's philosophical interpretation of current events. We're not endorsing a specific political platform.
Absolutely, just reporting what's in the text.
Right. But she points out a prevalent societal narrative where women, and the feminist movement specifically, are increasingly being blamed for a wider cultural malaise among men.
Like it's our fault they're unhappy.
Precisely. She observes a trend across Western democracies. She cites the appeal of figures like Donald Trump in the U.S., Jordan Bardella in France, or even the rise of neo-Nazi movements among young men in Germany.
A lot of radicalization.
Yes, and she notes that this political radicalization of young men is often framed by critics as a direct reaction to feminism. In this prevailing narrative, male anger is seen as the inevitable, almost natural result of men being prevented from having free access to women's bodies and traditional power structures.
So she is basically identifying this incredible trap. The culture is attempting to hold women responsible for the bad behavior of men, regardless of the scale.
It's the ultimate victim blaming.
It really is. If a man becomes politically radicalized, it's because feminists pushed him too far. If a man assaults a woman, it's because her skirt was too short, or conversely, because she was too cold to him. It is a completely exhausting double bind where the woman is always at fault.
It's maddening.
And I think she perfectly captures the emotional toll of feeling trapped in this system by choosing two very specific, highly contrasting epigraphs to open her book.
Oh, the epigraphs are brilliant.
They really are. The first is a quote from the celebrated French author Marguerite Duras. Duras wrote, "You have to love men a lot. Otherwise, it's not possible. You can't stand them."
It's a brilliant quote to open with, because it speaks to the mandatory, inescapable nature of heterosexuality and patriarchy.
You can't just avoid them.
Exactly. Women are required, socially, economically, legally, and romantically, to partner with men, to work for men, to share parks and courthouses with men.
Because they are half the population.
Right, because you cannot simply opt out of half the human race. You are forced to cultivate a deep, almost irrational love and grace for them, just to psychologically survive the overarching system that oppresses you.
Right. It's a survival mechanism. And then she pairs that heavy philosophical quote with the second epigraph, which is just lyrics from a lighthearted pop song by Elaine Souchon.
Such a stark contrast.
Yeah, the lyrics are about young boys having shining eyes because they're playing a fool's game of trying to look under girls' skirts as the wind blows.
Yes, boys being boys, right?
Exactly. So Garcia's deliberately framing her entire existence right in the space between these two poles. On one end, you have the monstrous, undeniable reality of men like Dominique Pellico, or the high-profile abusers she mentions in the text like Puff Daddy or the late Abbé Pierre.
The absolute extremes of abuse.
Right. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have the completely normalized, softly romanticized, everyday microaggressions like boys trying to look up skirts being written off as cute or harmless. She is asking, where is the safe middle ground between the monster and the boy looking up your skirt?
And the devastating answer she arrives at is that there often isn't a safe middle ground. The spectrum is continuous.
It's all part of the same continuum.
Exactly. And it's precisely that realization, that profound sense of shared vulnerability and constant navigation that forged the unique community of women standing outside the courthouse in the cold.
Bringing us right back to Brigitte and Bernadette.
Yes. Which brings us to a crucial piece of historical context. Because Garcia does not view the Avignon trial in isolation. She places it in direct lineage with the history of feminist solidarity and legal battles in France.
This is where the history of French law gets really interesting, because Garcia compares the scene in Avignon to another extremely famous French trial from 1978. That one took place in Aix-en-Provence.
A hugely important moment in legal history.
It really was. For our listeners who might not be familiar with French legal history, the 1978 trial was an absolute watershed moment. It was largely driven by the MLF, the Mouvement de Libération des Femmes, or the Women's Liberation Movement.
They pushed so hard for that trial.
They did. At that time in France, rape was frequently downgraded in the justice system. It was treated essentially as a misdemeanor, handled in lower courts, often dismissed as a private matter or a so-called crime of passion.
Which is just wild to think about now.
I know. The activists in 1978 fought tooth and nail to ensure that the rape of two young Belgian tourists was tried in the assize court. Again, that is the high court reserved for major felonies with a jury.
Right.
The 1978 trial was about establishing a fundamental legal baseline that just did not exist before. Rape is a severe crime, it belongs in the highest criminal court, and it must be punished as a major felony. It was a battle for legal recognition.
But Garcia argues that the trial in Avignon in 2024 and 2025 is fundamentally different. It is the child of a much later, much more complex era.
Oh, so?
Well, it is the product of the post-DSK scandal when the powerful French politician Dominique Strauss-Kahn was accused of assault, and most crucially, it is a trial taking place in the post-#MeToo era.
So what does this all mean? I want to unpack this because I think a lot of people, myself included, honestly looked at the massive global explosion of the #MeToo movement and thought, okay, this is it.
Like, we finally won the war.
Yes. We thought this is the great reckoning. We finally ripped the Band-Aid off. We've exposed the abusers in Hollywood and politics, in our workplaces.
We irrevocably changed the cultural conversation.
Exactly. We thought this was the final episode in the long fight against gender violence. But Garcia's revelation, standing in that freezing overflow room, looking at the screen showing 51 perfectly ordinary men who continued to drug and assault a woman long after #MeToo had dominated the news.
Yeah.
Her revelation is that #MeToo was absolutely not the final battle. It was just another chapter.
She focuses heavily on this disillusionment in her analysis of consent. Because, the global media and many legal scholars have universally dubbed the Pellico case the trial of consent.
Right, that's the buzzword everywhere.
It is. But Garcia, who, it should be noted, has literally written a previous highly regarded book entirely on the philosophy of consent, she argues that relying on this trial to be a turning point for consent is a trap.
A trap, why?
Because it cannot merely be a legal turning point. To explain why the law is not enough, she utilizes a fantastic and highly cynical quote included in the text from Robert Badinter.
Oh, I love this quote. Badinter was a legendary former French minister of justice, right? Famous for abolishing the death penalty in France.
That's one.
So this quote is incredible, and it perfectly captures the bureaucratic mindset. Badinter said, "When we don't know what to do, we can always make a law. It doesn't cost much and makes people happy. Whether it's effective is another question."
It is a devastatingly accurate summary of the gap between passing legislation and actually changing human behavior. Garcia's point is that the concept of consent has successfully conquered the legal realm.
Thanks to the activists in 1978.
Exactly, and the #MeToo movement. The laws are on the books. The legal definitions of what constitutes sexual violence are relatively clear. But the Manon trial proves, horrifyingly and undeniably, that consent has utterly failed to conquer the social realm.
The culture hasn't caught up to the law.
Not at all. Think about the 51 men in that glass box and the other 20 men who logged onto the Coco website but were never identified.
Right.
They lived in a post-#MeToo world. They saw the news, they knew the slogans.
But they didn't care.
They simply do not care about the legal definition of consent. They operated in a deeply ingrained cultural sphere where women's bodies were still subconsciously viewed as accessible objects for their gratification, regardless of what the penal code strictly says.
The law explicitly said no, but the underlying culture whispered, "Go ahead. She's asleep. The husband said it's fine. No one will ever know."
That's exactly it.
And this colossal failure of the law to change the culture is exactly why the solidarity of those women outside the courthouse is so vital. It's the only defense left.
It's all they have.
When Garcia talks about standing out there on the pavement with Brigitte and Bernadette, she notes a profound, almost overwhelming sense of nous toutes, which translates to all of us.
All of us.
That's powerful.
It is.
She realizes that standing in that line is not just an abstract political exercise. It's not just #activism. It is a visceral, deeply embodied, shared understanding of the physical and emotional stakes.
Because the women standing in that line recognize the terrifying truth that the judges in the courtroom might actually miss.
Yeah.
They know that this trial isn't just judging Dominique Pellico and his 50 co-defendants.
Who is it judging?
It is putting the entirety of society on trial. It is judging the culture, the jokes, the political narratives, and the deeply ingrained patriarchal norms that produce these men in the first place.
It's judging the environment that made 70 men in a 30-mile radius look at a chat room message and think, yes, this is an acceptable, normal way to spend my Tuesday night.
It is an incredibly heavy realization. But as Garcia proves, it's absolutely necessary to look at it directly, without flinching.
Well, we have gone on quite a journey today through Garcia's text. We started on the freezing pavement outside the Avignon courthouse, looking at the women who refused to look away.
We certainly covered a lot of ground.
We examined the physical geography of justice and how a static camera angle in an overflow room can create an optical illusion that sanitizes the horrific reality of the perpetrators.
The danger of the huis clos and the limited frame.
Right. We looked at the terrifying, undeniable mathematics of Monsieur Tout le Monde, Mr. Everyman, and the complete failure of high-definition video to pierce the cognitive dissonance of these men.
They just wouldn't admit intent.
We mapped out the architecture of fear, analyzing how the simple act of walking through a local park requires a complex risk assessment for women. And finally, we dismantled the illusion that legal consent is enough to protect us when the social culture remains so broken.
And this exploration raises an important question, and it is one we really want to turn over to you, the listener, right now. Think about the spaces you move through every day.
The mundane spaces.
Exactly. When you navigate your own public spaces, your local parks, your subway commutes, your office hallways, how much of your movement, how much of your daily mental energy is dictated by these unseen power dynamics?
Are you walking under the scaffolding, constantly looking up?
Or are you privileged enough to walk through the park without ever noticing the sightlines?
It's something to really chew on. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Building on Garcia's deeply philosophical premise, but looking toward the future.
What's the thought?
Well, this trial, massive and historic as it is, will eventually end. The defense lawyers will make their final cynical arguments. The judges and the juries will deliberate. The verdicts will be handed down and sentences will be read.
It will conclude.
But what happens on the day after the verdict? When the Un viol est un viol banner is finally unhooked from the ancient city ramparts, when the hundreds of international journalists pack up their cameras and leave Avignon, how do these ordinary men reintegrate into society?
That is a chilling thought.
How do the men who are acquitted, or the ones who serve relatively short sentences, or the thousands of others across the country who used that Coco site but were never caught, how do they fold back into the social fabric?
They will go back to the parks.
They will go back to the coffee machines, back to the waiting halls. If the absolute limits of the court system cannot save us, and if the massive cultural earthquake of #MeToo was not the final battle, where exactly does the next revolution have to take place?
This knowledge is a tool, really. A tool for seeing your city differently, and potentially for helping to change it.
It's been a really insightful deep dive, I think. This document provides such a vital framework, especially for projects like the Feminist Park Project that are trying to build something fundamentally different. It shows just how interlinked urban design and social justice are.
It really does. But it also shows the scale of the challenge, right? It requires sustained effort, real commitment, and a genuine willingness to shift power dynamics in how cities get made and managed.
Definitely. It makes you think about how we ensure those voices, the ones that have been excluded, are actually heard and centered.
There's another quote from Sarah Ahmed that feels relevant here.
Go on.
She says, "If you have to shout to be heard, you are heard as shouting."
That's powerful.
It makes you ponder, doesn't it? How can the design of public space itself work differently? How can it amplify the voices of those who've been historically silenced, ensuring their needs are met without them having to shout just to be noticed?
How can design itself listen? That's a really provocative thought to end on.
A lot to think about.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.